Hey, welcome to Storied Arcs, the deep dive, one trade paperback at a time through independent comic book arcs. We are in episode 4, chapter 4 of Paper Girls. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And Alex, I gotta say, this is the one where we enter what I would call, I guess, full Brian K. Vaughan mode. It's an exciting one on so many levels. It's like full of prescient comments and commentary. There's some stuff dealing with sex and sexual orientation, and most key signature of Brian K. Vaughan work is there are multiple character deaths.
Yes.
Just dude loves offing people.
Yes.
So we didn't talk about this before we started, which is probably the only thing we didn't cover, but I kind of liked it last week, taking a one step back and ranking our favorite arcs so far. And I believe last week you indicated that you thought Volume 4 was your favorite.
I think so. At the time, I said Volume 2 of the 3 we had done.
But when we ended the last panel of the last of 3, you were like, "This is where it gets awesome."
Yeah. Because I there's something about the idea of, it's one thing to in the second arc, the second volume, to bring it to quote unquote present day. Obviously, the book was being released in 2016, 2017, so. To bring it to quote unquote present day is always interesting to put your characters there. But here we get thrown into the recent past, but obviously not the same recent past. It's a slightly skewed recent past. This isn't the year 2000 as maybe it was actually experienced, while 2016 was very much like that was the world you walked outside and saw in terms of the type of technology, the lack of shopping malls, things like that. Here we have a slightly turned on its axis year 2000. And I think there are a lot of fun things you can do with that. And then I think that BKV and Cliff Chang do, both in the writing and in the visuals, they have a lot of fun with it. So I on reread, I don't know. It may be my favorite arc overall, but I still think my favorite moments are between the two Aarons. Cause we obviously get a parallel here between the two Tiffanys.
Right.
But it's slightly different. I think it's just part of the commentary that they have going on through the whole series. The idea of it's one thing to meet yourself as like a full grown adult, which is what Aaron does in 2016. It's another thing to meet yourself as let's be honest, a quasi-adult at 24,
Right.
Especially
for Gen X, which is...
Exactly.
Right.
So there's a vastly different experience, and you think about, and maybe we'll get this as we go through, but you look at the two older versions, the two adult characters of 2016 Aaron and 2000 Tiffany. 2016 Aaron understands kind of fundamentally that maybe her life didn't turn out the way she thought it was when she was younger, but she was okay with that. She understands, hey, that's life. It goes how it goes. I made mistakes. I made some good choices, whatever it is. It got me to where I am now. And I'm content. I'm okay with that. You've got 2000 Tiffany, a 24-year-old who's looking back like, I have wasted everything that was ever given to me. What am I doing? She looks back about how she is, it feels like complete despair on what her life has currently become, outside of the fact that the world is burning, there are giant robots outside, tearing up the town and destroying the world. And I think that's another version of this kind of age versus youth, that this book shows so much of, given that our characters are teenagers and their ostensible enemies are the quote unquote old timers,
Yeah. Well, and I was wondering if this arc in particular hits you and I differently because of our age. I was in middle school, 7th or 8th grade for Y2K.
See, that still hurts. It's fine now. We can talk now as peers, but if I had met you in 2000, I was in my second year in college in 2000, so that there's, the generation gap, the age gap, obviously it gets smaller as you get older.
But that's true. Yeah. I mean, yeah. My wife and I have a significant age gap that some people bulk out on paper, but when they meet us, no one would ever think it. So
yeah, it's just, but like said, if we were to, because I was going to ask, what you remember of Y2K.
Oh, I was defiantly. So I wanted to watch the ball drop. My friend was over. There was some college football game on, and
sure, it probably was, yeah.
On Y2K, it's like, man, college football stops for nothing.
Nothing whatsoever.
He wanted to watch that, so he turned picture in picture on. He had the ball dropping in the small corner with the football on the large screen, and I knew we had bought like the Y2K software, which Lord knows what it did. Nothing, I think.
Probably nothing.
But we had purchased that, but you were still supposed to have your computer off at midnight.
Yes, you
and
were.
then turn it on to test its safety afterwards. I defiantly sat there browsing the internet from 11:59 to 12:01, and I was like, nothing happened. What's the point?
It is, looking back on it, it's just so much of that, and it just sounds so incredibly dumb now. And that maybe that's the benefit of hindsight. But yeah, I mean, no, I was definitely, I was at a party. I had just gotten back from,
not in an Applebee's, right?
No, not
so.
Applebee's.
Neither of us can connect with that aspect of it.
Oh no, I'm sorry, I can't do math. I was in my first year in college because it would have been fall of '99 into 2000. Right, I'm an idiot. But yeah, so we had gotten back. I was at the University of Virginia, and we had played a bowl game in Miami, and we got back from Miami on the 31st. And then promptly, we get back, everyone goes back to their places, and we went to we had a big party there. And clearly nothing happened, aside from like two of my friends having like very, very, very bad reactions to, drinking way too much, to the point where
I thought you were going to say from drinking Miami water, which is very legit as well.
Yeah. Well,
you drink tap water in Miami. Okay.
Yeah. We had left Miami at that point, but two of my friends were not Y2K compliant, but all the electronics seemed to be okay. But yeah, it really is hard to explain if you weren't not just alive, but like really aware. Like this was a really big deal, and I think we see some of that in the epigraphs that they chose for some of these issues. That going from Time magazine to the Weekly World News, like everyone had the same sort of thing. It was hard to tell who was being serious and who was trying to be satire, because there was this real fear, this real fear. One of my good buddies from high school was like convinced that like, no man, like bad stuff's gonna happen. And yeah, he was obviously wrong. And
I could never get a straight answer on exactly what was supposed to happen. For vague reasons, no government in the world would be able to stop their nuclear missiles from launching at midnight. Yeah. Or maybe it was, and it was like, well, it seems like you just turn off the computer and they won't fire. But maybe the fear was that it would only take one country accidentally having a nuclear weapon fire, and then there would be a knee-jerk reaction, and it would start World War III. But either way, it was certainly nothing supernatural, which is what was also going around, and maybe something with like the Aztec calendar, something. Or was that later?
That was 2012. We were supposed to end in 2012.
Oh yeah, because there was a really bad movie called 2012.
Yes, yeah.
At any rate, that's not what we're here to discuss. We're here to discuss issues 16 through 20. Yes, 16 through 20. And we open with the Applebee's continues the conversation, but only for one small page. And then we jump straight to the young grandfather. Yes. Which I think is our first snippet of him.
It is, yeah. And I think...
And by the end of this arc, we understand the one we've been seeing is the one that's running out the play that young grandfather calls at the end of this story arc, right?
Yeah. And I think there is some, the panel, it opens and they're talking about, hey, where did they go? What time did they go to? And you think they're referring to our four paper girls. They're tracking them. But then we see, oh wait, no, this is a younger grandfather. And as we progress through this volume, we see that actually the time travelers that they're tracking, that this young version of grandfather's tracking, there are our three teenagers that we were introduced to in the first arc, Heck, Nando, and Jude. So, there's a little bit of a misdirection there because we think of the time travelers, we think of our protagonists, but here we see that no, this is, kind of the,
that grandfather's not aware of our girls yet.
No,
but we know old grandfather is because he says all their hopes rest on them.
Yes. So he's aware of them. So yeah, so it is, I was going to say it's the kind of the in-time continuity, but obviously it doesn't make a lot of sense. Really, because he's still from the future.
The only
comes back.
thing that counts as in-time continuity is whatever panel you're looking at.
Pretty much so.
Because there are multiple versions of each character now floating around.
Yeah.
Especially these future characters who have, quote, declared war on the timeline.
Yeah. But this version of Grandfather is one that appeared in the year 2000 to try and stop our three teenage time travelers, Heck, Nando, and Jude. He is there, so he doesn't have the experience of having met, our paper girls at the end of our first arc,
right.
So he doesn't have that experience. And, he even bristles at being called grandfather, which the idea that maybe this is still something that's kind of new to him.
Which is clearly an elected office.
Yeah. It's a title, a position he holds. And we also find out in this arc later on in this arc that this whole time grandfather is Japo. He is the child. He is Wari's child who was born.
It was very hard for me to hold 11, that in last week. I remembered it. Yeah. As soon as we met the child, and I was like, "We said we weren't going to do spoilers. Just keep it to yourself." I was like, "But what if I'm wrong? What if I was just speculating?" And it's like, no. You have insider information. I'd read it twice before. Which
is why we mentioned last episode that volume 3 is a lot of table setting. There's a lot of stuff put out there, in terms of,
which is 100% necessary.
Absolutely. You got to have some table setting here that ends kind of the first half of the story. Since at this point, it's a completed story. We know it's 30 issues, but it sets up things. You got to meet Wari and Japo. You have to understand the origins of time travel through Dr. Bronstein. You have to get all of that there. So in this issue, a lot of stuff in this arc, a lot of stuff starts really tying together. So we get the backstory or the origin. We learn the origin of who grandfather is, who Japo is. We come back and we see, Heck, Nando, and Jude, and we see not only them, but we see their influence on the timeline. And specifically with the cartoonist, Charlotte. What is it?
Spakevsky?
Spakevsky?
Yeah, I wrote it down, but my handwriting is hard to read.
I have it typed and I'm looking at it, and it's either Spachevsky or Spakevsky. I'm sorry. I'm not Polish. I don't know how that would be pronounced. Nor am I, Eastern European. So, it's one of those two. But we see the influence that they've had, and we start seeing that, and as they are filtering back through time, which is also back in time through our story, we see them here, presumably when they leave here, they jump back to the beginning of the story. When we see them leave, they talk about, hey, we got this.
And one of them is going to their end. Right?
Yes. Yeah. We talk, Jude dies before we even had a chance to meet him. But we see through the conversations with Charlotte that Jude was the one that told her how to track and find the foldings. And that's what she was doing when she was, when Heck and Nando were looking at the paper and looking at the comic strip, they were looking for the codes that Charlotte had hidden in there so they can find the folding. So all that stuff was taught to her. And again, it wraps up why. So it also includes the importance also of the newspaper. This fact that our girls are paper girls.
Which our girls first land in the mall again.
Yeah.
And the three of them go straight to it, figure out where she lives. They go visit Charlotte. And the character that Charlotte reminds me of, and this may be a meaningless comparison for listeners who are reading their first Brian K. Vaughan, but D. Oswald Heist from Saga.
Yeah.
You remember the guy in the lighthouse who was the author? Yeah, he wrote the pulp romance novels and played dumb, but he really was like, there was that moment where they were with him where it felt like the characters could exhale for a moment and learn a lot of important information very quickly from a well-written character, not an exposition bot.
Well, but the effect is the same. Is, you know, so much of what Charlotte does in her issues is just like exposition. You're getting history, you know.
Right, but I didn't find Charlotte boring, nor did I find Oswald Heist. And normally, I get really annoyed when there's an exposition character.
And I think that goes down to the writing, the way it's done. It's still very conversational. There are still interstitials there, like in that whole diatribe where it really seems like only Aaron is listening. There's that one page little back and forth where Mac and KJ are whispering to each other, you know, and Mac calls her like, hey, this crazy lesbian lady is whatever. And KJ whispers back like, you know, you shouldn't say that because like I might be a lesbian or I might be a lesbian already.
Right.
And you see Mac respond like, that's exactly what did you just say? Like, so you still have these little character moments that are fit into the fact that, oh, you turn the page and now we're still getting more exposition. We're getting more history. And I think that's just BKV's talent as a writer, that it doesn't feel like,
right. But at this point in the story arc as well, I think I'd been starved for backstory for so long, which I was reading through my original Goodreads posts on this. And my comment on volume 4 was like, finally, some explanation of what's going on. Like, I was enjoying myself, but and like at the end of 3, I was like, I still have no idea what's going on. I just want someone to explain something. And, you know, you roll straight into volume 4 and you're there.
Yeah. And I think that all comes down to the planning and the execution there, that he knows, you know, and again, you know, I think we talked before we started recording the idea that, you know, as the issues were being released, I don't think we were aware at this time that the series is only going to be 30 issues. That I think that wasn't kind of revealed until the solicitations came out towards the end of towards that last arc, those last 5 issues. So, you know, at the time you're reading this, you don't know that you've crossed the halfway point. You don't know when you finish issue 15, the end of book 3, that you've crossed the halfway point and you're now on the downslope towards the end. You're unaware of that, but reading back on it now, it feels incredibly natural that, oh, now we've crossed halfway point. So here's kind of not so much a reset, but here is now some of the answers of all the things we set up, especially in that previous arc in volume 3, where there's so many things introduced that it's unclear as to, wait, why is this important? Why are we back in prehistoric times? You know, what's the point of all this? And now we see a lot of stuff tying together. And that's a lot of the heavy lifting that this book does. But you think you're totally right that it doesn't feel like it's being force fed. It's not like you're reading a big text page or just blocks of exposition. The way it's presented feels incredibly conversational. You're kind of in the position of at this point, Aaron, KJ, and Mac, and really Aaron, because again, it seems like Aaron's the one that's paying attention. The audience, she's our audience avatar here again. She's kind of asking the questions and making the connections as Charlotte's speaking, that I think the audience has the same things that she's aware of. I think the reader is aware of. And so I think that's why it doesn't feel kind of heavy handed. It doesn't feel like it's just being thrown out there. It's being revealed in a way that feels very natural.
Yeah, and I think, to me, Dr. Bronstein felt a little exposition-y. It was like, here's a character, we don't really know anything about her except just unloading exposition.
100%. And I think the difference there is what she was doing was she was making a recording to an unknown person. So she's literally just speaking to herself.
Right.
So there's no one responding to her. She's just talking out loud. So that only benefits us, the reader, you know?
Right. Whereas here, Charlotte says something, and then the girls can interrogate her and ask the questions we want to know.
Exactly. Because it's presented in a conversational fashion, it feels more natural because they're asking the questions the reader would have. So no, again, I agree there. Bronstein, just because of the presentation of the story, it feels much easier to read here. And you get through those pages, those panels when they're down in Charlotte's basement, and you realize kind of how much information has been downloaded to you, but at the same time, you don't feel like you've read it all. You don't feel like it's been given to you.
Yes.
You just get to the end and you're like, oh, wow, I know a lot more now than I did 3 pages ago.
And all this said, though, Charlotte is a great character because she pulls a gun on them within an issue or two.
Yes.
This is a broader strokes question that I want to address now before it comes too clear. But based on these first 4 story arcs, do you believe we are supposed to side with the old timers or the teens, I'll go ahead and say my opinion. I believe your initial instinct is to follow the teens because you meet them first, and that they heal Aaron. Then you start to see quite a bit more of the old timer, and it's never like looking at Emperor Palpatine, right? He's not like sinister on a throne. He doesn't seem to have evil intentions. He's trying to protect and restore the timeline as he sees it. These kids, you don't quite know what their motive is, but they seem heroic and altruistic. Yeah. And I think Brian doesn't want you to think of either of them as good or bad. I agree.
I think you're definitely supposed to start out thinking like, oh.
But I can't help myself. I want to take side. Anytime there's a war, I want to take a side.
Yeah. And I think there's something that Charlotte says in that, in that conversation down in the basement when they see her, her like her crazy person wall with all the maps and all that, and they see her orange her tangerine iMac. But she talks about how what the kids want, what the teenagers want is I have it written down here. It said the younger generation believes that it has the right to live in the best possible present for themselves and not just the world that exists because of what generations before them did. And what Charlotte says the old timers believe is, hey, everything that's happened, both good and for ill, has to happen because that's how it happened. So yeah, grandfather's whole deal here is that like we're trying to not so much restore or protect, just like, hey, this thing's happened. All these things happened that got us to where we are now.
But here's the question.
That's the way it is.
Here's my question based on that. The year 2000 this story arc is in, is that the same year 2000 that preceded our 2016 Aaron?
Yes. Good question.
I don't think it is. I think this new 2000 is a result of the teens.
Okay, interesting. Because I disagree. I think
you think it would have already happened that way?
Well, because it already happened that way. But the question is,
how could that not have come up with Aaron?
Because
Aaron?
the idea is that you see it with when 1988 Tiffany is after she's picked up by the cop to the Applebee's. At some point because only she at the beginning only she and 2000 Tiffany can actually see the robots because of
Sock'em.
Because of whatever how they went to the folding, whatever mumbo jumbo there.
Angle in the fold. Yeah.
No one else can see these robots, and so the cop drives directly into the foot of one and wrecks the car. And she pulls the cop out, and then we see those drones come in, and boom, they fix the car and they like modify the memory of the cop. So yes. I think the idea is that.
Okay. And to strengthen your argument, the fact that old Tiffany had to come through the fold and had that vision means that all this stuff for our young Tiffany has already happened to old Tiffany.
Yes.
But again, we're really bumming ourselves out by calling her old Tiffany when she's 24.
It's 24.
It's a fatal mistake of this podcast.
It's really hard there. I think you're right. The idea is that, because both times we talk about, we've met the adult version of the characters, both 2016 Aaron and 2000 Tiffany, when both of their younger selves have asked about like, hey, why don't we remember this stuff? Why don't we stay in touch with these girls? They all have some sort of excuse of, hey, we quit the route. We didn't stay in touch. Obviously Aaron didn't remember getting shot, but she had a scar there, Tiffany, 2000's Tiffany, when she's trying to get into the convenience store, right when we meet her, she sees Heck, Nando, and Jude. You know, they're all like wrapped up, and she has a moment of like, wait, did I remember this? Have I seen? So something sparks way back in the recesses of her brain that maybe there's something there. But I think what we're supposed to believe, I think so, the way I've read it, is that all this stuff gets erased because there is one scene, one panel after.
Okay. You're saying it did happen, but there's no way 2016 Aaron could remember it because it's all been erased.
Cleaned up by the old timers. It goes back to what Clone Aaron said,
and the old timers are the ones cleaning it up.
Yes, yeah. Because there's a panel here
where he even says, "Don't worry how much damage they do. We'll get it cleaned up."
Yeah, and you know, our future teens, they have their mech and they fight Grandfather and his mech. But after that fight's over, we see over the city there's like 4 or 5 of those same Grandfather's mechs around the city, and I believe they're the ones fixing things. They're the ones sending the drones out. They're repairing the buildings, modifying memories, things like that. And I think that's also what they said, you know, when they zap away someone from that timeline, the whole idea is it removes them from the timeline. They get preserved in the future, so they have no memory. So when they get zapped back, they don't remember anything. So I think that's why
Charlotte has built a defense for herself with that bunker in the basement.
Yes, yeah.
Presumably she's been zapped a couple times.
You would think, but because she has a relationship with our future teenagers, they gave her the knowledge and maybe some tech, I don't know. But yeah, she's been given things to where she is aware of all the time travel and the things that are going on. Yeah, which makes her an outlier there. But so I think it's meant to be that, yeah, all this stuff did happen, but you don't remember it because the old timers have gone back and they've wiped it all, you know, they've cleaned it all up. So, meaning the world did actually end on January 1st, 2000. But not because of Y2K. It all went to hell because 3 teenagers from the future decided to jump back to the year 2000 on that day. Yes. And that's what caused everything to go haywire.
So let me see if this is an accurate statement of the status of the war. And I don't think this is addressed. As far as I can tell, the teens are not trying to do anything at all to the old timers.
No,
the teens are just self-interested, and they're from 70,000 AD, and they're just trying to have a good time. They're trying to live their best lives. They're trying to go find a time period where they want to live in because they think they'd fit in, which ironically, old Tiffany relates to. 24-year-old Tiffany relates to. She wants to go back to the 80s. Whereas the old timers, they are basically self-appointed cops of the timeline.
Yes,
they're like the TVA.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah, and they're the ones that say
they're like, we don't really know what the consequences would be of you guys doing this stuff, but you really shouldn't.
Yeah. Well, and also we should remember too that the version of Grandfather that we are dealing with here, you know, our 3 teenagers are from well in the future, past where he is, because as he calls them, those 3 are their descendants. They're from even further in the future than wherever this version of Grandfather is from before he jumped to the year 2000. So whatever year he's in, our 3 kids, our 3 time travelers, are from way in the future beyond them. So they're trying to jump back because.
Although I think they're still within a natural lifespan of the Grandfather. Whenever he's from, because his plan is to go back to his time and wait until he catches up, because they have rules where they will not jump too far forward.
Yeah. And we get that at the end there when again,
patience.
Arc ends with another time jump. You know, he jumps, you know, he knows that, he finds out that our 4 paper girls have jumped to, you know, what his acolyte says is our time. And at which point Grandfather's like, well, okay, well then, you know, we don't need to jump there. You know, we just got to wait, you know, well, you know, they have jumped there immediately and they will get there eventually, you know,
right.
And they'll be there at the same time. And he will at that point already be aware of these 4 girls are going to be there because he just met them in the year 2000. You know, it's the idea of, you know, yes, he's waiting for them, but they're still going to arrive at the same time because when they get there, he's already going to be there. He doesn't need to jump back there because, you know, he already knows he's going to show up there. He's going to be alive there because that's his time.
Right. So he's making minimal damage to the timeline wherever possible.
Exactly.
But it's just it's so interesting that okay, so here we basically get two basic human tendencies on time. The teenagers, ironically, have what old people tend to have, which is like, if only our country or world or whatever could go back to this decade, this time, things were so much better then. The teens,
we could fix it.
The 70,000 AD teens are trying to go back to a more idealized time. And the old timers are like, look, there was good and bad in each point in time. And, the slow arc is still moving toward progress. So there's no better time to be in than the one you're born in.
Yeah.
And so I think it's funny that those are the two basic views. And I do think people tend to be more future-oriented or past-oriented.
I would agree. Yeah.
And
you're looking forward, you're looking backward.
Typically, it's young people looking forward and old people looking backwards. But he's flipped it here for these characters. So
I think most in our world, the young people look at is of, well, things maybe not be great now, but we're next.
We'll be in charge. Yeah.
We can change things.
Yeah.
And older generations look back and be like, well, that was really screwed up. Man, if we went back and did A, B, and C differently, maybe we're in we're in a different spot. And I think what's interesting also along those lines, again, going back to our two adult versions of our kids we've met, when Aaron in 2016 comes across these kids, that moment of when she tells her younger self, the one thing to do differently is stay friends with these girls. Don't change anything else. Do whatever it is. Live your life.
Yeah.
But do that one thing. And she's also like, listen, I'm not going with you. I got to stay here because this is my time. I'm here now and you girls got to go and we'll deal with whatever it is. And, the last thing we see of her after the girls jump into the folding, the helicopter that Missy's flying, like gets wrapped up in whatever tentacle monster is there. But her thing is, I got to stay here and deal with my time. 2000 Tiffany is like, well, hell, everything sucks here. So I might as well go back to 1988. And her first thought is, well, yeah, maybe we can change some stuff. Maybe with my future knowledge, I can change some things. And that's very much the attitude that our three teenagers for the future have, that Heck, Nando, and Jude have. The idea of we can go back, we can affect change, we can make things better, for the time now and the time to come. And that's still the attitude that they give 2000's Tiffany.
Right. And, this is completely tangential. Just wanted to note here that now we have Tiff meeting Tiff. As you mentioned, Aaron already met Aaron, meaning we do not have any Back to the Future or Harry Potter dogma about meeting yourself when you time travel. It's apparently totally acceptable. A little vomiting is standard protocol, but aside from that, you're going to be fine. Much like, by the time this comes out, the spoiler lid will be off. Much like Doctor Strange traveling through the multiverse. You just need a good 30 seconds of vomiting and you're good to go.
Yeah, you're fine.
So let's get back to Tiff, though, because ostensibly this arc is about her. The last one closes with her. This one opens with her. We get to meet her future self. And then at the end of 17, you get that shocking panel that, again, it's classic comics in general, but Brian K. Vaughan really knows how to hit you with a zinger on the last panel. You meet Tiff's husband, who is apparently Jared Leto.
I was gonna say budget store Chris Angel from back in the day.
I think Jared Leto's by 2022.
Yeah.
Either way, not the best looking guy. Looks like he would think method acting is cool.
Yeah.
So,
but look, to each their own. I mean, it's a gorgeous panel drawn by Cliff Chang, and you have that. It's kind of bathed in that reds and purples and maroons, that kind of like kind of magic hour kind of. Oh yeah, I'm there.
Just like
it fits with the goth theme and all that.
Yeah, just flat out everything about the art in this book, and we've stopped emphasizing it as much, but I don't think we've stopped appreciating it. It's just stunning, and it's all just exactly what it needs to be.
Yeah.
And there's so much storytelling through color here, which we picked up on. And like when you see him and you learn who he is, you think, oh my gosh, what happened to Tiff?
Yeah.
And the thing is, nothing crazy. Like, just life happened to her.
Yeah.
And she went to business school in New York, which is where she met, off-brand Jared Leto.
Yeah.
And young Tiff immediately says, business, ooh.
Yeah. Well, if we go back to the second arc, when her and Mac are going to find, they're going to Mac's house and they're talking about their future and all that. And Tiffany says something like, God, if in 2016, if I'm not, whatever, graduated from Harvard or whatever, or a doctor or published or something like that, like my mom will kill me. So, so 12-year-old Tiffany has this version of herself of just being like wildly successful in science and math and things like that. The kind of in the tech space, which goes along with kind of, we see she is kind of our proto techie there. She had the
she
super high-end
intuitively
walkie-talkies.
navigates the robot.
Yeah. She's the early video game junkie. She has the super high-end walkie-talkies. Like, so she's the person you would think would have been like, the early adopter of all the first gen stuff. That's the prototype we're seeing in her. And so, when she's confronted with herself as kind of a, neo-goth punk, who went to business school, I would imagine the business school part actually offended her more than
100%
than the look of herself at 24.
Well, the other girls are not as accepting of her husband, but she just kind of takes it in stride. But the girls reunite eventually, and Charlotte turns on them, says they know too much if they're captured by the old timers. The old timers will be able to decrypt the teenagers' communication methods.
Yeah.
All this other stuff. Can't let them escape. Doesn't necessarily seem intent on killing them, but more capturing them.
And
containing
think so.
them. Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
You don't hold a gun to someone and explain why when you're going to kill them. You just kill them.
Yeah, I don't think she's meant to be someone who's out here to murder children. I don't think so. It's possible.
Especially since she's on the protein side and she does rescue them by the end of this story arc.
Yeah. I think she simply wants them to stay around with her, because that's, that's where the important stuff is going to happen in her mind. I think so.
Right. So then as the girls are escaping, they see this cop pull up. They're like, how are we going to play this? The cop says, don't worry, all shall be forgotten.
Yes.
What? Is he... He's not like planted from the future as someone who will be wiping them out. He himself has not been wiped out.
I think that goes back to then that's the cop that had picked up Tiffany.
That's true.
And so I think the idea is that yes, he has been erased, and that the whatever the future old timers did to erase the memories and fix everything is just going by, and it's kind of issuing a warning or a message that all be forgotten, because that's what they're going to do. So maybe that's just like a residual side effect of having your memory reset in this world.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
But I thought, what a weirdly potentially unnecessary panel, except to remind us of the mechanics.
I think so. I read it that way. The idea that it ties back into what we first heard from Clone Air, and the idea that, hey, none of this matters here because you're all going to forget anyway. So, because that's what they do. That's what the old timers do. They're going to come in, they're going to clean up all the mess, make everybody forget, they're going to fix everything, and you're going to wake up the next day and not remember any of it.
Yeah. Okay. Then we get our first death. Not our first of the series, right?
No.
Bronstein presumably is dead. But Prioris dies.
Yeah.
Which I assume is a title, not a name.
I would have to assume so.
Which means they're referring to each other by their titles.
Yeah, she's like the lead acolyte or whatever.
Head of the nuns. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is weird, the appropriated religious terminology. She dies. the grandfather is deeply struck by this. And at this point, I had been thinking like, oh, the grandfather has these rules. He plays by the rules. He must be the good guy. But this causes him to kind of snap a little bit and demand that they issue last rites, which, again, the appropriated religious terminology, kind of implying that whatever restraint he's had with regard to the rules or how to fight fair, which, by the way, Prioris is the one who's telling him he was guilty of fighting too fair. Yeah. She dies, and it seems to lift the ban on unfair fighting. That being said, they are clearly handicapped against their future offspring.
Yes, they're at a disadvantage.
Technologically, which is why he's like, if I escalate this thing, it's not going to go well for us. Because they have how much more technology than us.
And I think it's you mentioned the idea of him kind of maybe being on the edge of teetering on following along to following the rules, breaking the rules, whatever it is. I think it's telling that Prioris's last words, she calls him by his real name, Jaffo, which he had been insisting on, not calling grandfather. Right. So he does that for emphasis and also to reveal to the audience who he is. But her last words are, I know you'll want to break the rules, but you can't change and then she fades out. Presumably, she's going to say, but you can't change the past or you can't change what happens.
Right.
But the idea that she understands that his instinct would be something bad happened. I'm going to break the rules to fix it in my favor here, But yeah, I think the read is right that afterwards, he's kind of let off the chain there and kind of goes with what is their version of the nuclear option. The idea of okay, well, now we've crossed some sort of Rubicon here, and now it's time for his version of escalation.
But yet still the patience. Hey, just to jump in from the future here. We are skipping about a 20-30 minute speculative discussion on the TV show, which at the time we recorded this, the release date was unannounced. And after recording this, Amazon almost immediately announced that they would be releasing the TV show before this episode would come out. So we'll jump ahead to Prioris Dies, which was the end of 1920, really kind of one issue. Old Tiff meets the teens, which we've already talked about. Meets herself. The girls go to St. Pete's Church for sanctuary. They are attacked. Presumably, those are people in the employ of old timers, correct?
Yes.
Charlotte rescues them, and not just rescues them, bullets to the heads. She does not mess around.
Yeah, no, she's
clearly not her first rodeo.
Yeah.
So, and then we see Chris appears to die. We learn that he has just been zapped forward in time and had his memory wiped.
But in the church, she didn't quite kill one of them. Charlotte did. And Charlotte actually gets burned. And I think it's safe to say that she is dead. Because she doesn't vaporize.
She literally melts, yeah.
Yeah, that is a different reaction than what we saw Chris
as I said at the beginning, multiple characters dying, Charlotte being one, Prioris being the other. And both of those, in a sense, we have seen before this story arc. So, we've seen the shadow of Charlotte in the comic strips.
Yes.
And Prioris has been with Grandfather the whole time.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that can't be true. She can't be with old Grandfather, who we saw earlier.
But I think,
but he's had that picture of her.
Yeah, and we see, again, she appears to be like the head acolyte or whatever, and we know that the older version that we were first introduced to of Grandfather, everyone around him is they're pretty subservient. They're loyal. They're going to do what he says, and this is kind of the origin of that. We're seeing his origin now because again, when we meet him in this arc, he's uncomfortable with being called Grandfather. He doesn't like that title. But Prioris is telling him you're going to like this in the future. So there is a sense of like she maybe has some future knowledge.
Yeah. So either way, they cast some long shadow, and it didn't feel like they didn't feel like disposable props to me. No. When they died, I felt like, oh, that is. I mean, it wasn't one of our 4 girls, but outside of the 4 girls, those felt like significant characters to have just offed.
Yeah, well, and they felt like they could be more significant. Because again, the comic strip has been hinted at all the way back to the first arc. And so
possibly issue 1. It's 3 or 4.
It's when they go to the future. It's after they take Aaron to the future, and then they head to the basement. Nando's looking at the newspaper, and Aaron's like, "What do you look at the newspaper for?" And it's just, and he gives some quasi vague thing about he's looking for some information there. So that's been there the whole time, and we finally get some answers to that. And then, once we get her exposition dump on the audience, then she's effectively gone.
Right. But the girls, after this, they flee the church. They go to the robot. The 2 Tiffs take command. Old timer, our grandfather, sees the robot who just killed Pryor's come back to life. He goes nuts. Girls travel forward to. This time, we do not have a way to identify. I guess that's kind of the norm, and I guess that's why the last stinger was exciting. We don't know. We know they're way in the future. Yeah. At the end of 1, we knew they were in 2016, I think. And at the end of 2, we were pretty sure they were in the ancient past. Yeah. 3, the Applebee's Y2K. Yeah. Very on the nose. We knew right where they are. Yeah. Now we're like, this is where they thought 2000 would look like. But obviously it's going to be much, much further in the future.
We don't know the exact time. Again, one of Grandpa's acolytes says, where the hell did they go? To the one place we're not allowed to follow, the future, our future. And that's when Grandfather says, okay, well, if that's where they go, then we'll follow them the old-fashioned way, which is just, we'll wait. We'll catch up with them in time. So we don't know what year that is exactly. And obviously that last splash page, that Chang and Wilson draw in color, it's meant to clearly be in the future. You have futuristic-ish looking buildings. You've got what looks like some sort of flying tram or train there. There are rings around the buildings, which obviously mean the future.
The architects just get together in a certain year and just say, you know what? Yeah. We're just going for the rings now around every building.
We're putting floating rings on the buildings.
People need to know they're in the future. We've arrived.
Yes.
We're putting the rings on the building.
Yep.
All right. So any closing thoughts on this story arc?
No, I think my main takeaway from this one is this is when stuff really starts coming together. That if you've been you're reading it along, and especially after the end of the 3rd arc, when you aren't really certain why we spent this time in the prehistoric past, the way past, and it feels like there's a lot of table setting there. I think you get to this arc and you read these issues, and a lot of stuff starts clicking into place. Now it answers a lot of questions, but it raises a lot more. You're like, you get the revelation that Grandfather is Japo, and your first thought's like, oh wow, that's great,
right?
And then
I could even see the TV show doing a whole episode just on Japo, and starting with his pregnant mother in prehistoric times, showing how he jumps forward, and then the true origin here is when Pryorus dies, right?
Yeah, but it
is where he becomes the man he is.
Yeah, and it's the idea of like, that's a cool revelation. You're like, oh wow, that's the guy we've been seeing this whole time. He was the baby in the 3rd arc, but he's now Grandfather. And so it answers a question of who is this guy? Why do they call him Grandfather? But it raises a ton more questions. Like, wait a minute, how did he get from the prehistoric time to way in the future so we could come back to the past now? Which is, still technically his future because he was born in 11,000.
There are a million caveats when we try to talk about when people are from or belong.
Yeah, but it's one of those things that it answers the questions, it gives the audience information, but it provides more questions to be answered later. But you still feel like you've reached a closure point there because you got some more knowledge there. Same thing with the comic strips. Same thing with our three initial time travelers. We learned how they ended up in 1988 because we see them first. I guess the implication is this is their first incursion, or one of them in the past, in the year 2000. That didn't go so well. And so, the conversation they have, in the alien text in the sewers, one of them is like, hey, do we really want to trust this pod to get us back home? And it's Jude, the character who dies, who says, like, screw the future. Like, we should press deeper in the past.
Right.
And so that's us knowing that, tying that loose end up of they go from here into 1988. Now, maybe they have other stops. We don't know, but presumably it's the same ship. So we know that this is the past for the characters that we saw in the first issue, in the first arc. Again, it gets brain melty there, but we have now seen where they came from, and it ties that loose end up of how they got there, what that ship is, and things of that nature. So I think this arc is it's heavy on tying up some loose ends from the first half of the story. Maybe not tying up loose ends, but at least tying some stuff together, to set up for what we now know is, the conclusion in the last two arcs, the last 10 issues.
Yeah. So my final thought is Grandfather's Joppo the galaxy's biggest hypocrite? He is telling the teens that you must stay in the time that you're born. He was born in 11,706 BC and is hanging out in the future.
Yeah.
What are the rules here, Joppo? You've got some explaining to do. I do think it's coming. I don't know about the hypocrisy element of it. Yeah. That just occurred to me on this reading of like, hold on a second. Yeah. You don't think people can like change times to live in a better time? Why don't you go back to 11,706 BC?
Well, I think it also comes down to the idea of, we need to know more about when and how he moved through time. Like at what point in his life did he leave prehistoric time? At this point, we don't know that. It isn't, again, that's one of the questions that is arisen from learning that grandfather is Joppo. How did he get there?
Right.
Last we saw, his mom, Wari, and Dr. Bronstein were sitting by that sacrificial altar next to the first folding, when our four paper girls went through. The three of them were still back in prehistoric time. And again, the whole idea, the plan at that point was that not the folding. They went back to Dr. Bronstein's ship because the plan was that ship was supposed to take them to 2055, Dr. Bronstein's time. It didn't take him there. It took him to the year 2000, and we get this arc here. So what happened to them back there? Where are they? And how does Joppo get from there as a baby, as a newborn, to obviously in the future at some point? So it's one of the things that turns up more questions than it answers. But yeah, absolutely.
We do have two more things that I know we need to discuss, but very quickly. Number one, the what's the word for them? Is epigraph the right word? Yeah.
Epigraph, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So 16 doesn't have one, but 17, 18, 19, 20 do.
Yes. So if you're looking at them there, before sometimes they were like pithy quotes, and they were they were in English, they were in the alien language. Last arc, they were just the dots, maybe presuming because it was a prehistoric language. So here for this arc, which I think is so great and funny, and clever, is that, for issues 17, 18, 19, and 20, they cite actual headlines and actual artifacts, relating to Y2K. Issue 17 is a Time magazine cover from January 18th, 1999. Talking about the potential end of the world thanks to Y2K. 18 may be my favorite because I specifically remember seeing these on electronics and computers. It was a sticker from Best Buy telling you to turn your computer off
100%
before midnight.
100% real.
Which is, you mentioned that you were one of the brave souls who was online on an active computer, risking it all.
That being said, I don't know what I was doing. Maybe I was on like AOL and some Messenger.
In 99, probably, if you were, I'd say you were a middle schooler, but that's the same junk that I was doing.
Everyone was doing. There were like 4 things to do on the internet back then.
Pretty much. Issue 19 is it's a more recent headline, but it's a Bloomberg Politics headline about, that the government finally shut down ended the commission on fixing Y2K, which is a very funny idea that we were potentially still working on this thing 17 years after the fact.
They nearly had it. They nearly had it.
Yeah.
Brutal.
They were so close.
Cut down on their prime.
Nothing happened. And then issue 20 is a Weekly World News headline. Oh God, is the Weekly World News still a thing? Are grocery store tabloids? Is that?
I didn't realize that was a tabloid.
The Weekly World News, yeah, that they're famous for Bat Boy. I think that's the big one. And it's possible we sound like 1,000-year-old people right now. But it was a newspaper tabloid that printed all the crazy stuff that was never real.
Yeah, and now it's Facebook.
It was like The Onion. The Onion was trying to be satire.
Right.
Weekly World News was just trying to be funny or weird, I guess. But it was the same sort of headline of like Y2K turns machine against man, and so you have these relics from the time, 3 of them from the era. God, the era. It's like it's 1,000 years ago. It was 22 years ago. Jesus.
Yeah.
Anyway, the idea that they're citing these real things, and we went out and we found these pictures of these of the actual things that are cited in these epigraphs, and if you haven't visited the webpage for this episode, we'll have those pictures on there so you can see them, and if you're on the younger side and don't know what a Weekly World News looks like, or God, maybe even Time Magazine now, you can go back and make fun of how we used to get news and media back in the day.
Yes, it was. It's like when you and I watch The West Wing now, and the press secretary says we're going to finish something before the news deadline or the print deadline. It's like, what an antiquated concept.
The print deadline.
Anytime something happens now, it's news 24/7.
24-hour news cycle. Yeah. Never ends. No.
And it's been really good for the human psyche.
Definitely. Yeah. Nothing but good stuff from
no trade-offs. Okay. So finally and I don't really have one this week. I love this arc, but there was no quote or moment or anything like that just like jumps out at me. Like I have to have it, return to it every single time. Although I would say if I have to say like not a moment, but a character, it's the Charlotte character. I feel like it's just the expositional character done so well. And then giving a tragic death so that you can't just keep pumping them for answers as the story goes on, which again goes back to the D. Oswald heist. I think
from Saga.
I might just keep thinking that because if you look over my shoulder, you see him there. That's I keep glancing at that and thinking like, I really like that character.
But no, I think you're right. I think the Charlotte character is a character that in lesser hands is a very clunky, ham-handed version of that exposition bot. That really, I think in lesser hands it takes you out of the story. I think it really does. It removes you from the story, while this really engages you. It draws you in because you're getting the answers that maybe you wanted or didn't even know you think you wanted, because you're engaging the same way that our three girls are engaging with it. Our protagonists are. They're asking the same questions. They have the same viewpoint that we, the audience, have. So it draws you closer to the story, as opposed to now you're just, now we're just getting a download of stuff. I'm going to read this text, and now I'm going to have more information about this than the characters do. That the feeling that this is just for the reader versus for the characters in the story. And the way it's done here, I think it's done perfectly for both.
I completely agree. So that's my go-to. Just, at this point in the story, you don't have to join, or you don't have to create a new character to make it compelling. The fact that you're able to create one and take them away and have it make a permanent impact on the story is just great. So what have you got?
I agree. Okay, actually, so I tease this at the end of the last episode that this is one of my really, really pedantic hills that I will die on. Whenever it comes up, I will be that guy that says, well, actually, and it's right at the beginning of the arc. It's the beginning of issue 16. When we meet young grandfather and prioress, grandfather is asking, where did they jump to? Where did they go? What year are they? And again, we think they're talking about our four girls, but really we find out later that they're talking about Heck, Nando, and June. But he's told that they're the year 2000, January 1st, 2000. And Jaffo, grandfather, says, why would they jump to the 21st century? And prioress does the actually of like, technically 21st century didn't start in the year 2000. And actually, that's the end of the 20th century, because there's no 0 year. And before she can finish, there's a great panel that Cliff draws, of the face that he gives prioress to get her to stop talking. Which is weirdly the exact face that everyone gives me
yes.
when I mention this here, because it's very simple, folks. There's no year 0. Because if I asked you right now to count to 10, you would not go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You just wouldn't. You'd go 1 through 10, meaning you end on 10, which means the first decade, the first 10 years is 0 to 10. Which means the first century, 1 to 10. The first century is 1 to 100. The first millennium is 1 to 1,000. And the next one starts on 1. It's not that complicated. And let me make it very clear here. I'm just talking about counting in terms of an official sense of when decades are, when centuries, when millennia are. Because obviously a decade can be any 10-year span. But we're talking about 21st century or the 20th century.
Point is
which
taken.
Is different.
And as I noted pre-podcast, Toby Ziegler agrees with you.
Yeah.
And you don't want to get in Toby's way.
Absolutely not.
And I will say, perhaps as further internal evidence here, we finished our run in the teens of Paper Girl issues by ending on 20. And we finish our last 10 issues by starting on 21 and ending at 30.
Well, now, so this is interesting. I don't think
it's when you complete 10.
So
which is why 2001 would be the first year, because you've completed 1,000 years.
Yes. Okay, but so
not completing 999.
Yeah. So 20 is the end of the second set of 10 issues, but it does not end the teens, because 19 is the last teen. So,
but the decade of the teens, well, I mean, in that case, there's only 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. There's only 7 teens.
When we talk about, so what I was going to bring up is there's a slightly different connotation or nomenclature is what I'm looking for when you're talking about like a pop culture decade. Because if you're talking about the 90s, you're talking about the era associated with the 90s. You're not actually talking about 1990, 1999, or 1991 to 2000. You're talking about the era of the 90s, which, if we're being honest from a pop culture standpoint, starts in like 91, 92, and probably ends on September 11th, 2001.
I was going to say a lot of the 90s happened in the 80s, according to some people. Who can't tell the difference, but yeah.
But when we think about the 90s, we think about, that was the era of grunge and alternative and things like that. Well, that didn't start in 1990. 1990, 1991, that's still 80s hangover there. But when we talk about the 9th decade or the 10th decade of the millennium, of the century, that starts at 91. So in terms of official counting, that's what matters. And we're talking about a little more informally about eras and time frames. That's much more loose. I'm just talking about if you refer to the 20th century, the 21st century, the first decade of the millennium, the second decade of the millennium, those are very specific numbers, and those have very discrete beginning and end points. And that's the pedantic hill I'll die on.
Yeah, and I agree with you, but I have never been a corrector on that point. I feel like I'm enough of like an English grammar junkie, and I'm always correcting people's, modifying absolutes and splitting infinitives and other things that are socially acceptable and even in some cases now grammatically acceptable. If you really want to make me mad, don't use an Oxford comma. Those are the hills I'll die on.
Oxford comma is a must. Also, another one is the correct use of begs the question.
Yes. Begging the question is actually a philosophical term.
It's a logical, it does not mean, hey, we should ask a question here. But that's what it's come to mean, and that's one of the ones that I've almost given up on that one because I try to explain to people and they just don't understand.
The one I've almost given up on, ironically, is moot point. M-O-O-T, not M-U-T-E. There's no such thing as a mute point. There is a moot point, but since I've grown tired of explaining it to people, it is now a mute point.
Yeah.
It's mute or moot. You decide.
Yeah, that's the cross we bear, I guess.
Oh my gosh, it hurts. All right. We will talk to you next week with issues 21 through 25 as we enter some future state with spinning saucers around all the buildings. What the year 2000 absolutely should have looked like, but we now know that it did not. Enjoy your reading and look forward to reading comments and starting to interact with the mailbag after this series is wrapped up. And again, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
Peace.